Hi folks, my name is Lara Joy. I'm Port Heritage Director at Dublin Port, and we're delighted to be hosting this lecture for the Dublin Festival History. It's our fourth year of working with the festival, and it's been fascinating to attend some of the lectures that they organise, but also if you go onto our YouTube channel, you'll see that we have a large number of our own lectures over the years that we've done on the festival there. I'm delighted to welcome you to the substation, which opened 2 weeks ago, which is part of our distributed museum network. After the lecture, if you haven't already, please do have a look at the graphics that explain the wonderful east wall that's down there in the basement. I'm delighted to introduce Dr. José Sánchez from AIVP, which is the Association of Unveil Port or City Ports, who's going to talk about port cities' love and hate on the quayside and look at the complexities of that relationship between cities and ports. Without further ado, I'm going to say, José, if you want to take over.
Thank you. I hope that was for Lar, because I have not done anything yet, so I have to demonstrate if it's worth it or not. Well, first of all, thank you all for joining us here, taking a bit of your time to be with us, and thank you, of course, to Dublin Port Company for inviting me to come here and participate in this program and to be, I think, one of the first ones to speak here in this great venue, which we've already shared in our network is a good example of how to reuse the heritage and show it and share it also with the citizens. I'm going to be moving around because I think if I stay here for 40 minutes, everybody's going to fall asleep very fast. So let's see if we can delay this a little bit. That would be nice. So yeah, my name is José Sánchez or José Sánchez, as you wish. I'm Portuguese and Spanish, so either work. I have to say that, well, I'm going to share with you two things. One is that I am, as usual, overwhelmed by how the people in Dublin take care of me every time I come here. But this time, I think you're really outdoing yourself, even saving the great weather, good weather for this weekend that I'm going to be here. You didn't have to. I know there are not so many days like this, so save it, I think, for other guests. And also I'm a bit nervous, actually. I've been lucky enough to make this presentation or similar to this one in other congresses a bit all over the world. But it's a bit different when you have friends in the audience. You know, you get a bit nervous and you care about what they're going to think. So I will do my best. If I sweat, it's because of the weather. If I stutter, it's because I'm nervous. Now, jokes aside, I prepared this presentation, and it's a bit touching some research that I've done myself a few years ago, but also it connects to the work that I do every day in AIVP. I will explain later a bit more what our organization is doing. And we're going to have three main parts. First part is going to be a bit more of a long introduction to the port-city relationship that connects a bit more to this love and hate or the complexity that entails. Then second part is going to focus more on sustainable development of this interaction of port and cities. And then I'm going to give a bit of selection of examples that show what actions are being taken today for a sustainable port-city relationship, okay? I hope you're not too bored, and I hope I can respond to the expectation of my dear colleagues from Dublin Port Company. Now, the first thing is really this introduction. So, what do we talk about when we talk about port-city relationships? It's not just about the physical boundary that we see that we are here now, really, in this boundary between the port premises, the port authority land, and the urban land. And in fact, it's a complex issue. And as one physics professor of mine used to say, if it is complex, take a step back to try to have a big of an overview of the broader problem. And in fact, when we talk about the port-city relationship, we're talking about the interaction between global maritime flows that are here, that you see, which bring all the goods that we use, the phone, the microphone that I'm using, shoes, cameras, and so on, and that they are part of even broader supply chains that operate in a global basis, and very often they are not visible because they operate based on this connection between the different points of this flow. So it is about the interaction between these flows and the fixities, which are the cities, where we spend our time, where we work, where we learn, where we eat, And I would say, of course, cities are dynamic, but they are more the fixed element of this equation. So, of course, this is a complex interaction because as well we're talking about global actors. They are going to be influencing how these flows can have an impact in the fixities, in the more physical element of this relationship. But we can also try to focus a bit more on the consequences, on the evolution. So, in a very serious way, sometimes it's really about what came first. And it's a bit this issue of the chicken and the egg. It's difficult to differentiate the origin of a port city from the origin of its own port. Even going back in history, trying to review the plans, some of those that we have here, they are so intertwined that it's difficult to say what actually happened first. There are many models, and I'm not going to go into great theoretical depth to that. There are also people that are much more qualified, and you can look for different interpretation models on how this relationship has evolved. You can see here talking about the port-city interface, about what is around it, about the influences and so on. But for the purpose of this lecture, this presentation, it's useful to have at least one that is a bit more established, broadly used, but also that entails some surprise, as we will see during the presentation. And it's one that was developed by a geographer, Mr. Brian Hoyle, first in 1989, and he was able to identify some stages, 5 stages initially, on the evolution of the port-city interface. And in fact, the first one, it was just until before the Industrial Revolution, where there was a very, could say even organic interaction between the port and the city, quite direct. And we can see it in many paintings, in many, even in the maps as well. Here is one picture of the port of Marseille. I'm not from Marseille myself, but it's a city that I really like, so I really like to use. You will see some pictures of it during the presentation. And this is a painting by José M in the port of Marseille in 1754, so halfway through the 18th century, still before the Industrial Revolution. And what you see here, and I move around, I hope it's big enough. Yes, of course, we have the maritime activities of different kind, unloading some cargo, but we also see some nobles here walking around and ladies, elegant ladies walking around the port. So it was really quite a direct interaction between the port and the city, the port activities in the city. We can see here in Lisbon. This is where I'm coming from. Today is warm here. Lisbon is much warmer, I have to tell you. So if you get a chance to also visit, it's a great port city. And here is a famous painting by Braun and Hogeberg from the 16th century. And you do see here, if you've ever been to Lisbon, this is what today is called Praça do Comércio, so the Commerce Square. And back in the day, it was Terreiro do Paço, the square of the palace. And you see that the maritime, the port activities were right at the core of the city. Even if, as it here in Dublin, and we can see here, there was certainly a wall protecting the city from the enemies that would arrive from the sea, but still there was a very direct interaction. But that, of course, changes. There is an evolution. And in fact, as soon as we arrive to the 19th, 20th century with the two industrial revolutions, what we see is that the landscape changes. It changes because we have new production processes, new logistic demands, new infrastructure, new technical capacities, and new configuration even of the port and the logistic infrastructure. Again, I told you I was going to use Marseille several times. So this is Marseille in the mid-19th century, 1840. And what is interesting, if you've been to Marseille, you know this is the Vieux Port. This is what we were seeing before in the painting by José M. This picture more or less was from here. And you see that there is still already some industrial settlements here, but it's quite, you would say, natural coast. And very quickly we see that just a few years later, there is already changes in how the coastline is working, the artificialization of this, responding to the new demands that were created by new logistic processes, new production processes, and so on. And going a little bit further away, already in 1866, see already the railway gaining much more attention, but then even what is now known as the Bazan Est, the one that is in the city, close to the city center. And you see that it's completely different scale, and it changes the relationship. And this is a bit what kind of environment we could wait. This is not Marseille, this is a bit closer, this is here in Dublin. And we see new kind of facilities, new kinds of equipment in the 19th century. We see some mechanization of logistic processes. We see it here, not exactly a railway, but we see already different kind of trains, even different kind of boats as well, and straight quay, as we're seeing here. And even if it's already creating a certain distance between the port and the city and the citizens, I go back to Lisbon, and I share with you this picture, because it's in the early 20th century, and it was a developed port, industrialized. This is the arrival of the crane, one new crane arriving to the port, and it's just an infrastructural investment. However, what we see here is that there is also people here that do not look like dockers. They were just here curious about this new piece of equipment that was arriving to the port, trying to understand, okay, what is this thing? And these people just walking around, and you see it. So even the beginning of the 20th century, if there were already changes in the configuration of this space, people could still arrive to the water side and still see a little bit about what was happening in the port. But now, going back to Hoyle model, we see that during the 20th century, strong changes happened in the port-city interface. And was based on a box, partly. Was based perhaps a bit more on this kind of box, but basically a box. Metal box that is a container that is at the base of our globalized economy. This was introduced halfway through the 20th century. This is the man, Malcolm McLean, an American owner of a trucking company. And he saw the opportunity of having one single way of transporting the cargo that could go from the ship directly into the truck or the lorry, and it would be much faster, accelerate the whole logistic process. And this gradually became more and more established globally, along with other agreements for global commerce. And this, of course, accelerated the changes that were already connected to the different technologies used on the port. And we see a new scale. It's no longer this now romanticized view of the port with wooden ships. We actually see that scale economies set the direction in which the logistics process has to go. Because the more boxes you can fit in a ship, the cheaper will be per box. It's a very simple equation. And of course, this causes also changes in the port-city relationship. If we move from a ship, I don't know if you can see this, but that is 137 meters or 200 meters long to 400 meter long. It's not in all routes globally, but you have also a spillover effect. So if in the main routes, Shanghai, Rotterdam, for example, you have these ships that are like 4 football fields, one after the other, it means that the ships that were before used in this route can now be used in other secondary routes. And of course, this is going to cause change. This is going to provoke a certain evolution in how the port functions, in the equipment, in the rules even. And we arrive to this kind of landscapes that we see a bit globally in ports. This is Genoa in Italy, where, well, it's not so welcoming anymore. It's not so easy for an inhabitant to walk around here. And it's not just because of that. It's true to acknowledge that is also because there are rules that were enforced a bit later, like the famous ISPS code to securing port facilities in ships, that also creates a certain barrier, even that kind. But again, it is a matter also of the scale. So of course, we are a bit far away from the boats that were visible in the great photo from Lisbon, right? Just to give you an idea, this is a man here. So it's not easy to deal with this kind of changes in the scale. And then, a bit connected to these changes, a new phenomenon emerges as well, which is that as ports respond to these scales and they reorganize the areas, the facilities they had available, sometimes expanding outside the original location, some of these waterfronts are redeveloped. They are no longer used for cargo, so a new idea of what can happen in these former port areas emerge. This is from the US in the 1960s, some of the first interventions to transform these former industrial waterfronts. And these are other examples that you can also see a bit later, which is Genova again, and Barcelona, also with good weather here more or less. And gradually, a certain postmodern imaginary is built in joining these two processes of saying, well, port facilities will continuously grow and be relocated, and we will transform ports. So there will be big separation between port and city. Actually, not really so. So this was set the idea this was the normal process that was going to happen. But if I walk around, if I'm lucky enough to travel for work, and I see, well, this is half true, let's say. This is Lisbon, and this is the main terminal they have. This is not exactly outside of the urban area. And this is not new. Most of these areas exist already since a long time ago. So we do see here strong port-city interaction. And if they try to relocate, it's also not easy, because that means changing even more other places in the coastline, or not finding the right dimensions or the right conditions to have a maritime terminal. And it's not Lisbon. Again, going back to Genova, we see here, even if there was a waterfront regeneration project here, there are still pretty much strong port activities like shipyards, also cruise passenger. But then it's not just here, it's that the port expanded. This goes all the way until here, where they have the main container terminal today. But this is also the city. So this breakup between ports and city that was somehow predicted in some theoretical models can be discussed. Here is another continent, in Valparaiso, in Chile. I was lucky enough to go there this year a couple of times to help in some project. And actually, it's quite a complex topography, as you can see. This is UNESCO World Heritage Site, this and some of the hills. And it's called the Port Neighborhood, actually. And it's next to the active port. This is today the second port of the country after San Antonio. So you can see that this increasing separation between port and city and the transformation of spaces is arguable. I think in Dublin, something of this kind might happen. I'm not from Dublin. I have not studied Dublin. And I'm surrounded by Dubliners. So I will not take my chances of arguing with you. This is just coming from an outsider, if you want. Now, what is interesting is the fact that then Hoyle also added a sixth phase to his original model a bit later, which was about the reconnection between port and city, and how some interventions can also help to establish this reconnection. Now, of course, this entails tension, not necessarily conflict. It can end up in a conflict, and we have seen it in many places, but definitely entails tension. Tension because, well, it's complex. We were just seeing it, how it has evolved along history. So the roots of this relationship have hundreds, thousands of years. It is complex because, yeah, it's not about just the physical interaction, and it's not just about the port authority or the port company and the municipality. It's actually a much more complex relationship in terms of which are the actors involved. It's a whole port ecosystem of different actors, and it's a whole urban ecosystem of actors. each one of them with the different priorities and ambitions to what can happen on the waterfront. Because for some, it will be an opportunity to get waterside for leisure, for others, real estate investment, for others, the necessary infrastructure for the company or for the factory that is in the hinterland and is the only way to actually export the butter or whatever it is produced. It is also a limited territory, because the waterfront is limited, even more in the context that we are, and is also very desired, as I was saying. And now it's not just about the economic and logistic efficiency, there are way more concerns to be considered when we're talking about the port-city relationship. Environmental, social, and economic ones. And of course, there are territorial and national tensions in terms of what the city wants, what the port city wants, and what the national government may want. And it's simple. When we talk about ports, we talk about a national infrastructure most of the time. It's not just for the benefit of the immediate surroundings, but it actually has an effect on hundreds of kilometers away. So of course, it is a key infrastructure, but the city is also legitimate to have their own ambitions to what can happen in the waterfront. So we have these tensions. There can be political tensions. I will not enter into that. I will avoid. I will just very carefully, but I think you all know what I mean. There are, of course, historical issues. We have seen the relationship did not start yesterday or even in this century. It is coming from, we have here good evidence from when this is even coming. And of course, each country is different. We say, joking, people say sometimes, all ports look alike. Well, we also say, when you have seen one port, you have seen one port. Because what is behind this first image that, yes, containers are all over the place, all over the world, each port works in a different way, and each country has its own different framework of laws and obligations and so on. All this to say, we work on these tensions. The organization I work with is called AIVP, as Lara was saying, and we work with this tension trying to help ports and cities, port authorities, municipalities, regional governments, companies, research institutions to try to build on these tensions, reduce them, and have a sustainable interaction. Right now, we have almost 200 members worldwide, so it shows that it is a topic that raises a lot of attention globally. So when we talk about potentially the problems of the port-city relationship in Dublin, that I'm sure something will exist, is not just about Dublin, it's something that is happening globally. Now we get to the second part of the presentation. How can we develop sustainable port-city relationships? Which is a bit, after so many hundreds and thousands of years, perhaps we should have learned something already. So when we talk about sustainable development, we have to frame it in a much bigger ambition, which is sustainable development as a whole. And here, the leading role is from the United Nations. I think we all know that. And it's also not something that we started last week. The discussion about sustainable development has been ongoing, particularly during the second half of the 20th century, especially after the 1970s, I would say, but then a bit more formalized with different meetings and different ambitions, different, base documents that gather these ambitions into some sort of roadmap. And we have been constantly updating this roadmap. The most recent one, you probably heard about it, 2030 Agenda, launched in 2015 with the famous 17 Sustainable Development Goals. You have seen, surely, this kind of very nice pictures in many places. It has also 169 objectives and 232 indicators and much more literature behind it to support it, and initiatives and in different levels and so on. But basically, it is really a structure in three main areas: economy, society, and environment. Here is in Portuguese, because I like this scheme. It really identifies, the three main pillars of sustainable development that are well known. How to have an agreement to have economic development, social development, environment. Then they added 17th goal, which is this one, which is just to work together and collaborate in this purpose. But it's not just about sustainable development as a global aim by the United Nations. If we look at ports and specialized agencies working with ports, We see that there is also an evolution in terms of the priorities that ports are pressured to take into consideration. We see that if until perhaps the 1980s was possible to plan a port expansion based on purely the economic performance, it was enough to justify many decisions. We're going to impact the GDP. We're going to create this amount of jobs. It's no longer the case. Even before we have this discussion about sustainable development and so on, there is a strong pressure to have also an environmental performance and also social performance. That the port evolves from just a logistic and economic hubs, which remains, of course, a core function, but gradually also grows into a certain center for local and regional value creation. And this is not just me saying it, this is several documents having launched in the last year, and we could go back still, accompanying and showing these ideas and these ambitions. Now, what we did, AIVP, and AIVP is with the V because we're based in France, I didn't say this, we're based in Le Havre, in Normandy, so Association Internationale Villes et Ports, Cities and Ports. We decided that after 2015 it was a bit unclear. This very ambitious agenda about sustainable development looks very nice, but how do we transform this into actual actions in the local context? Where we live, again, as I was saying before, where we actually spend our time, where the different entities develop their projects. So what we decided was, okay, let's see if we can adapt these goals and objectives and all this system into the concrete context of port cities, which is our business, we could say, our focus. So we had a discussion in Quebec during a World Congress that we host every couple of years. And then we started to ask our members, we reached a conclusion, we reached a document, I will explain now. And then we invited our members to gradually ratify also this document, which also Dublin Port is part of this process. And we reached these 10 goals that in a way tried to bridge, to adapt, to translate this global aim into the specific context of port-city interaction. Some of these are global aims that you very well know: climate change adaptation, transition in circular economy, mobility, governance, human capital, but also some are very specific: port culture, port-city interface, and all of them are from a port-city perspective, so that in the further depth, of course, they relate to the SDGs, as I was saying, the Sustainable Development Goals, but each one of them also has a specific actions, sub-actions that each member of our network could actually take in order to contribute to a sustainable port-city interaction and to a sustainable development as a global goal. And we're very happy to see that gradually our members are integrating it into their planning actions, into the strategic plans, into the sustainable development reports, and so on. Hopefully also doubling in short. We're moving forward now. This is just a bit of a quick peek on some tools that we are developing also to help our members to assess how good or bad they are doing according to each goal. I'm not going to bother you with this because I think this is more for the people that are working directly in the ports, but it's interesting because we want to measure. One of the challenges of sustainable development is how do you measure sustainable development? And we're trying to do this for the port-city relationship. Now, the most fun part of the presentation, I think, is really, okay, this is all very nice. Is actually something being done regarding the 10 goals. So I'm just sharing here some examples on climate change adaptation, which the goal is to prepare seaport cities and river cities to the consequences of climate change. Ports are in a crucial position to actually take action and be ready and contribute to this resiliency of the territory. And we see a couple of cases, both on reducing the risk of climate change and already preparing the territory. We see, for example, the Port of Rotterdam, that in its industrial hub is working to capture the CO2 and through pipelines take it to former empty gas deposits in order to avoid that we continue to produce CO2 and send it to the atmosphere. And this is a project that it has been in discussion for 3 or 4 years, and in 2024, will start the construction. It was just approved a couple of weeks ago. Other case, in San Diego in the US, we see how Port Authority is also using specific concrete pools like this one in order to build the breakwaters, to increase the resiliency of the territory. And it's not just about using pure concrete, but also a new kind of concrete that can help to the regeneration of the biodiversity. Other cases on energy transition and the quality of life, particularly for the citizens. We see also that ports are key players into reducing the energy that we use. They are responsible for vast territories. They are responsible also for very intense energy activities. So it is also an opportunity to reduce the impact that these activities can have. And we see how gradually more and more ports are implementing onshore power supply, which basically means that ships that are prepared can turn off the engines and receive energy, electric energy from the grid in order to stop polluting when they are docked. We see also that other cases where the closeness to the water allows to use it, for example, for heating system and cooling systems. We also see, for example, that some ports are establishing programs to support their stakeholders into developing sun power, solar power in their own facilities. In this case, it's not about financing, but also about orientating and seeing with technicians how prepare or not if this investment would make sense. Mobility is also one key issue affecting port cities worldwide. We believe that it's a responsibility as well to reduce the impact that this traffic can have in the citizens. And here, for example, we see a couple of cases. One is in Helsinki, where they, in coordination with the city, which is important again, is not the port alone, is in cooperation with other actors. They are working on a smart traffic system in order to allow a quicker and more efficient traffic flow from trucks that arrive via the ferries, and they still need to go through the city. And it's a matter of, small changes can actually make a great impact and avoid provoking this congestion. Other cases are a bit more extreme. Here is the case of Valparaiso. You saw the previous picture, right? That you have a container terminal completely surrounded by the city. So there is no space for waiting areas for trucks to actually get the access to the port, to the terminal. So what they developed is that they have this facility here, which is on the back of the city, if we want, where the trucks can actually enter. It's called DFEAL. They have a waiting area. They can already take care of some of the paperwork. And then they have a green light that allows them to directly go from here all the way until the terminal, reducing their presence in the urban structure. Because before, they used to go through all the streets of the city. Other cases that we see is increasingly also monitoring in terms of air quality, also of smells, and also on how to share this information. Until now, it was something perhaps reserved only for very advanced ports that had the resources to cover this cost. We gradually see that these systems are being more democratized and a bit more available. We see here also in small ports. Here is in Valencia, it's an environmental control station, but we also see it in small ports like Mallorca, where the citizens were very concerned about the air quality, and they established a project cooperating with the university in order to make a monitoring station, or several systems of monitoring station, and then also sharing this data for research. And we also see it here in Rotterdam. This is all one of the advanced cases that I was saying, and they have a specific e-nose system to really detect if there are leaks or if the smell is could affect the citizens. Other cases are more focusing on biodiversity. The ports, perhaps this is not the idea that we have when we talk about the port as an active actor for the protection of biodiversity. Perhaps we focus more on the energy transition and avoiding pollution and so on. But actually, they are responsible also for large areas of coastline and of course controlling the water. And here we see projects in Canada, well, this is not showing, where there is the ECHO program to protect the killer whales. And this is in cooperation with the maritime community, so that they actually reduce the speed while they're entering port in order to avoid noise pollution. Other cases in Ceuta or in Guadeloupe, in France, in the Caribbean, where they are also working either on studying the specific coral reefs that exist there, but also projects like, this is called Cayoli, that is in cooperation with the schools, so that also the students can actually get close to the port and learn a bit more about the port in a different way. Governance. This is probably one of the hot topics also in port-city relationships. And what we see as well is an evolution in terms of how to share the information and how to engage. The port, as I said before, can no longer take a decision by themselves without explaining what is happening inside the port. And this is exactly what we see. We see many ports that are investing in having either information strategies, they even with a specific website, or even having a port community liaison committees. So groups of citizens that they can share, meet regularly with the Port Authority in order to express their opinion and express their concern. We also saw it here, how the Dublin Port has been working on that for the longer term vision, but also for the cruise sector, I remember. And we also see it more and more because it's necessary. We see here the case I was saying before. This was a conflict. It was tension, but it was a conflict. For more than 10 years, there was no understanding on how port activities could continue and how it could eventually the port expand or increment its activity. They decided to start from scratch, again, after 10 years of lack of dialogue, and do exactly that. Launch a new kind of dialogue with the citizens and try to understand what is their vision. And I will get to that in a minute. But it's very crucial to have a vision for the kind of port city that we want. I didn't plan much to talk about port culture because we are, I would say, in a very good example on how to share and how to valorize the port culture and heritage. And I know that the Port of Dublin has been doing quite a lot also with the archives and other initiatives. But you can also do it in a more, how to put it, fun or a way that is closer to other generations. For example, here, we see it in Rotterdam and Le Havre, how they launched something called the Port City Instawalks, working also with schools that the students can explore the port by themselves, the areas that are safe, and then create their own itineraries so that they can share the point of view of what they perceive, they understand of the port with others. They have done it already several times, and actually can lead to a new kind of tourism initiatives, a new way of seeing and valorizing the port that perhaps before they would not do. So I leave here the suggestion, I think, for LAR. I think it's a good idea for Dublin. Now, as I was saying before, it's not just about the specific goal, but it's also about trying to have a more complete vision for a complex territory as it is the port city. I know that the relationship with England has been ups and downs, let's say, to put it mildly. But every now and then they do something interesting. This is Port of London Authority. And the reason why I'll explain this is because they launched the Thames Vision 2035. And it was a port authority. It was not another organization. It was a port authority responsible for all these, I think, 80 or 90 miles of river. So it was necessary to have a broader vision, not just about the port business, but about the broader land and all the uses that take place along the river. And they updated very recently to the Thames Vision 2050, including 6 goals in this vision, which is increasing traffic, cargo, and employment, classic port business, I would say. Increase also the transport of goods by inland waterways, okay, makes sense. But then the other 4 are also interesting. Passenger transport on the river, more sports and leisure activities with more participants, protect and improve the environment and the heritage, and one that was called community and culture, more people enjoying the river. And it was a whole vision for this very big part of England, in which the port was just one of the actors. And it was interesting because in Valparaiso, what we saw is exactly the same. The bay is much broader. The port only takes one part, but it was important to have a coherent idea of the territory that we want for the future for the entire bay. And this is something that I think is a good idea to be considered. We can also talk about that in other terms that are not so physical or urbanistic, if we want, which is the smart port city idea. It's a new kind of interface, the digital one, where port and city can also work together, sharing data in order to have improved mobility solutions or traffic systems that we were seeing before, to have the monitoring strategies that we were seeing before. Probably the city also has its own concerns about the quality of the air. It makes sense to have systems that work together. Also to have a better cooperation for supply and demand of different services, improve the efficiency of some of the services, prediction of externalities, also, for example, connected to weather events, extreme weather events that can happen, that are going to affect an area much broader than just the port territory or the Uman territory. And of course, greater transparency, which is also important for the governance than the way seen before. And further on, before I finish, we were talking before about how the port must be value generator, added value generator, focusing beyond the logistics and the economic impact. So, for example, we see cases in which there is a direct investment or engagement in terms of innovation and blue economy. And this is a bit a global ambition. It's not just for one very advanced port. We see it all over the place. We see it with specific startup areas for example, here, this is in Amsterdam, for a circular economy connected to the port. So this can also happen in the port. We see it here, research centers for more pure logistic areas. This is in Halifax, in Canada. We also see programs, even in Argentina, Smart Port Lab in Bahia Blanca, in a port. And we can see it in Morocco, we have seen it in France, in Portugal, in different locations. And ports can really be accelerators of innovation and also of the implementation of blue economy strategies. Now, just to draw some conclusions, we have seen that the port-city relationship is dynamic, is complex, and is also very much connected to the context where it takes place. One port-city relationship is going to be different from the next. And of course, it has evolved for centuries, as we have here. We can see here better than any other place. Also, that port cities are key for sustainable development and the Agenda 2030 if we really want to reach these goals. That they can contribute to the sustainable port-city relationship is going to contribute to the sustainable development agenda. What we're seeing before, that ports are really innovation engines for themselves, but also for the broader society. That is important to have these visions that I was saying before, a holistic vision of the port city territory as a whole, and that citizens must be part of the debate. The era in which infrastructural project could happen just behind closed doors is long by. This is something that we have seen here. And it's important that the people feel that the port is their port, that in the case of Dublin, the people from Dublin are proud of having their port, that they feel it as their own port. So I drop here, I leave here some ideas. I just leave also an invitation. We're going to continue working and discussing these ideas in Venice in just a few weeks, in November. If there is a city that has a long history of port-city relationship, I think Venice is the place. And also, because I didn't talk so much about my research and so on, I didn't want to bother you too much. If somebody's curious about the journey, I actually did a journey about walking around port cities and asking people and so on. If you want to know more, please go ahead and Google the port and the city. It's just a small onboard diary, and you can learn more a bit why I like to talk about port cities. So this is it. I hope it was useful. I didn't see so many people falling asleep, so I would consider myself successful. And I'm happy to stay here a bit longer and ask any questions that you may have. So, thank you.
Thank you very much, Jose. And Jose's too modest to kind of, he was only to the last slide that you realise he spent the last 10 years very much researching this area and was awarded his PhD on port cities in 2019 from Hamburg. But that was a fascinating talk, and I think thank you very much. Great to see you. As it is a lunchtime lecture, he's come in exactly as he promised in 45 minutes, so I'd like to thank him for that. But if anyone does have any questions, please do put your hand in the air, and if you want to raise any questions. Otherwise, please do look around the rest of the room and look at the east wall if you haven't seen it, and also in particular the wonderful map exhibition that our colleague Marta Lopez has put on for the Heritage Festival. Those are the original maps dating back to the 1600s, showing the expansion of the city and port. So I throw it open to the floor if anyone has a question. Otherwise, I wish you a nice lunch, and thank you very much for coming along. Thank you, folks.
Thank you.